Okay, welcome everyone. In this video, I want to continue talking about geometry objects that we can work with in the SF package. So I'm working with this Quarto document in RStudio in Posit Cloud. So we've talked about points and polygons so far, and those are really the two, well, everything is built from points, but those are going to be our main building blocks. So those are the two most common objects. Some other objects, here are 5 other objects that also commonly occur in working with SF objects. The first is what's called a line string. And I just want to emphasize that all of these functions are called in with like st underscore and then whatever the name of the geometry is. And we're going to enter our objects as points or matrices of points or lists of matrices. So a line string is just a sequence of points that are connected with straight lines. It's like a polygon, but it doesn't necessarily need to end at the point where it started. So it's just a bunch, we would define this using a bunch of points, sequence of points, and based on the sequence of the points, that's how we join them together. Multi-point is a set of points. So if we plot this, it's just going to plot all of the points, but not actually join edges between them. So in that case, the order, the sequence is not as important since we're just going to plot a bunch of points. For multi-polygon, this is multiple polygons. So I could have a square over here, and then I could have a different polygon, which is not a hole, but located someplace else. So in instance where you might use multi-polygons would be if you're like describing a chain of islands, and then you might have a polygon that describes each of those islands, and then you want to arrange those polygons in a way that makes sense relative to each other. We could have another geometry is the multi-line string. Like the multi-polygon, this is just several line strings that we might just combine together. And then we have a geometry collection that we would create with st underscore geometry collection. And this is just a set of other geometries. So I might have some points. I might have a line string over here. I might have a multi-polygon over there. And I want to join all of these objects together into one SF object. And so I'm allowed to combine any other type of geometry together. They don't need to be the same type. And I call that a geometry collection. I'm just not allowed to put another geometry collection in my set of things that I'm merging together. So I can put together lines and multi-line strings and multi-polygons, but I can't put another geometry collection as one element of another geometry collection. Okay, so let's take a look at some of examples of these other geometry objects that we just talked about. And so here I'm going to just set up my points randomly rather than focus too much. It's not that important where the coordinates are. But what this is doing is it's just creating a matrix that has 2 columns. It's picking 10 random values from the standard normal distribution, and it's going to use those 10 values to set up a matrix. So that matrix is going to have 2 columns and 5 points. So that's kind of one thing that's important to note here is that this line string should have 5 points. So each row in this matrix would be a different point. So then I create this matrix. I'm going to assign this matrix to points. So I'm going to overwrite the points that I had stored earlier. And we'll print this out. The fact that it's inside of parentheses means we're going to assign this to points, and we'll also see what it looks like. And once I've got my points, I can enter them into the st underscore line string function. I'm going to store that result to something that I call LS1 for line string 1. We'll see what that looks like on the screen since that's also inside of a set of parentheses, and then we'll plot it. So I'm going to run this code cell to do all of those things. Some of them are back here. So you can see this is the matrix that was created. So it's picking off the first row is going to be the first point. This is going to be the second point in my line string, the third point, the fourth point, and then the fifth point over here. So this last row is not equal to the first row. So this is not going to be some polygon that is closed. This is just going to be 5 points that we connect with with 4 different line segments. So I don't remember if you map out exactly what the points are. You can match them up over here. So this is an example of a line string. If I want to create a multi-point object, here I'm going to use the same matrix to define my multi-point object. So I'm going to use points again, but rather than input them into the st underscore line string function, I'm now going to use the st underscore multi-point function to create a multi-point object that I call mp1, and then I'm going to plot that object. So over here, it is the same set of points that we had over here. Just now, it's arranging them into a multi-point object. So it just plotted those 5 points, but did not draw any line segments between points. So the ordering of this matrix is not really important when we're thinking about a multi-point object, since we're not joining lines between consecutive points. We can create a multi-polygon. So here I'm using the matrix outer that I defined earlier, and I'm using the matrix hole 1 and hole 2 that we defined earlier. So that gave us this object over here. This was a polygon, 1 polygon that has an outer ring and an inner hole. No, I'm sorry, this was the wrong one. So we're starting with this polygon over here. So we had an outer ring and we had 2 holes. So that is what I'm calling polygon 1. That was that square with the 2 holes above. Polygon 2 is just going to be that outer ring, but we're going to translate it around. That's what this plus 24 means. It just means take this outer ring and shift it. And now I'm going to create a multi-polygon by combining the 2 polygons. So notice each of these polygons is a list. This first polygon had an outer ring and 2 holes. So it consisted of a list of 3 matrices. Polygon 2 is just an outer ring without a hole, but we still need to input that matrix inside of a list. So you can just think about this as a matrix that we used the previous matrix to create. So we shifted that previous matrix. So that is a list. And now my multi-polygon is a list of lists. So that's something to be mindful of, that each of these polygons I need to just define as a list. And then the multi-polygon I define as a list of my polygons. And once I've got my multi-polygon defined, I can create a SF object for the multi-polygon by inputting MP into st underscore multi-polygon. And here I'm going to add axes to this plot so we can map it out. And now you can see what happens to this first. So here we have the first polygon. Here we have the second polygon. And what this plus 24 does is it added 24 to both the x and the y coordinate of each point. So it takes this square, moves it 24 units to the right and 24 units up. and that's where this other square comes from. So that would be a multi-polygon, which is, this one is constructed from two different polygons, but you can join together any number of polygons. We can define a multi-line string by defining a matrix of points. Here I'm defining a second matrix points 2, which is going to consist of 3 points. We have our first matrix, which was a random matrix of 5 rows and 2 columns. So that was the 5-point multi-line that we constructed over here. So this was the first multi-line. I'm creating a second matrix to define a second multi-line. And I can combine steps here. So what I'm doing is I'm creating a multi-line string by creating a list of those two matrices. So I enter each line string as a separate matrix, and then I create a list of those matrices similar to how we created polygons. And I input that list into the st underscore multi-line string function. I store that to an object called ML1, and then I plot that object ML1. So here's what it looks like. And so this was a printout of the matrix points 2. So this is describing the location of the 3 points that I'm going to use to construct that second line string. We can see the multi-line string is a list of 2 matrices. This is the first matrix of 5 points. This is the second matrix of 3 points. They're joined in a list. And then we can plot that multi-line string. So we can see here was the first line string, and then here was the second line string that we just added. Okay, and then lastly, we can create a geometry collection by creating a list of our other objects. So I'm trying to remember here. P1 was point 1, PL1 was polygon 1, that was the square with 2 holes in it, and LS1 is line string 1. So this is going to join together 1 point, 1 polygon, and 1 line string. It's going to create a geometry collection that I store to GC for geometry collection. You can call it whatever you like. And then we plot it with the plot function. And so here I shaded the kind of area inside of the outer ring gray. We've got these 2 holes in white. One of the points is kind of hidden here just slightly, but you can see the point is partly in this hole and partly covered up by the gray shading. And then we have this line string over here. So here we have a point which is inside of this polygon. We have this polygon which has 2 holes in it. And then we have this line string over here. And we've joined these 3 things together to form one object that we call a geometry collection. Okay, so I will stop here, and in the next video, we'll talk about how you can figure out which geometry object is appropriate for which situation.